Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Shea Anything Podcast. I'm Andy Martino, in for Doug Williams. In other words, I am Andres Gimenez. He is Amed Rosario. This is going to be so good that we're going to have an awkward conversation about post-roll moving forward. I'm joined today by John Harper. Doug's on vacation. Hello, John. Always a pleasure to be joined by you.
Andy, yeah, that's a nice tag you gave yourself.
You like what I did there?
Yeah, I like that future his. So you're in good shape. Maybe Doug has to worry here.
He does. Look, I may not have had the billing while I was up and coming that Doug had, but I think I've really surprised some people by how I've emerged on the scene. So since we last spoke, there has been no baseball whatsoever since Thursday's podcast, which Doug did with Keith. The Mets haven't played, of course, because they had two members of the organization, one player and one coach, still unidentified, test positive for COVID. John and I just came off a long Zoom call with Brodie Van Wagenen to brief us on what happened and what the Mets are going to do going forward. So, John, what were your bullet points coming out of that time with Brodie?
Well, obviously, as far as the COVID stuff, he didn't reveal who the players were, the coach, or anybody involved, but he sounded optimistic that the way everything was handled there, and as far as going forward, that they should be ready to go. They still the close contact people are making their way back from Miami. He didn't say exactly how. And it sounds like the two who were infected are still in Miami. So I guess we'll know more as we get. I mean, it's probably by process of elimination. We may be able to figure out who it was, but out of privacy issues, they're not going to reveal that right now. And as for the baseball part, I thought it was interesting that, he said he can't even give us an idea of who will be starting the starting pitchers, what the rotation will look like, because he doesn't know what these guys were able to do over this forced time off, how much guys threw and how much they didn't. So guys are coming in today and are each kind of one-on-one working with Jeremy Hefner, the pitching coach, and as far as find out what they did and what they're going to be capable of in the next few days. So still a lot of unknowns, but I guess when you look at what happened to teams like the Marlins and the Cardinals with these things, I guess this sounds like pretty much the best possible situation.
Yeah, the Mets and the Reds are the two teams that have had positives and no outbreaks. And I asked Brodie about that, and he, not getting into too many specifics, obviously, to protect people's identity, but just felt like really there were only 4 people in the organization other than the 2 who were positive that were in close contact enough to even have to be isolated and left in Miami. So it does seem like, other than the 2 people who did have symptoms, who do seem to be coming out of it, and the concern for them, it seems like they dodged a bullet here in terms of the actual virus.
Yeah, and listen, you never know with these things. I mean, what did the Cardinals miss 2 weeks, right? So the Mets should be able to pretty much pick up without. It's not a huge disruption to a season. It is a long disruption, relatively speaking, but nothing like what some of these other teams had to deal with. And I do think that they're going to have they're going to have 3 doubleheaders in the next 6 days or so. So that's not going to be easy, but they do set up fairly well. And if these guys are all ready to go, what I would do, I'd throw DeGrom in one of those 7 innings for sure, 7-inning doubleheader games. I guess he could start the first game out of the box because they're going to have the doubleheader on Tuesday. And you hope he can go 7, and you don't even need to use your bullpen. And then he can throw one of those on Tuesday and another one on Sunday. So that would cover a lot of it if he could end up doing that. And they have some depth in that pen with some of the way some of these guys have come on. Jared Hughes, and they got Brock back, so they have some depth there. And Brodie did say, though, that he made it sound like anyway they might get creative here in terms of using openers, things like that. He used the term bulk innings, I think
bulk
it was.
Innings.
That's what they're calling guys. They're not necessarily calling them starters. And he kind of left the door open as to where Mats would be used. He would be used one way or another as a bulk inning guy. So We'll see about that. But
which is what he grew up dreaming of, being a bulk inning guy when he was in Little League. So he's I'm sure that's exactly how he wants to be referred to. But I think the point I think that makes is that whether it's by necessity a little bit through this situation, so many games the next week, and also a bit by design, with the Mets going more into analytics every year and their pitching usage, they're joining that world in baseball that we've seen the Yankees, for example, and the Rays really strategize with using those, thinking about pitching in terms of how many outs do you want to get today rather than who's your starter. The
Right.
Rays basically, other than they got a few guys at the top of the rotation, haven't had a rotation the last couple of years. It's been so many openers. The Yankees have been going in that direction too. So it sounds like with Matz, what Brody said was we don't know if he'll be a valuable starting pitcher, but we know he'll be a valuable pitcher for us. So it's giving them innings. However, the Mets need to get them, and it's almost like one continuous game, piecing together 27 outs after another, right? It's not the baseball that you covered in the 80s and 90s.
No, there is still room for a stud starter like a DeGrom for sure. And the more you have them, still the better off you are. We've seen that in recent postseasons recent years because these guys have been used to eat up those innings even out of the bullpen. But yeah, for regular season, and that's why the Rays have been so good is because not necessarily their starters were that great, but their whole up and down the staff through that bullpen, they've always managed to find a way to put those great bullpens together, and they just use all those guys. So that might work to the Mets' advantage, but I guess we're going to need to see more. It's going to be interesting now to see how much they can use Lugo. They were committed to him starting. I assume they're still going to do that. And then I thought Matz might be that second guy to follow him if they had played that game last Thursday. And they're going to have a lot of options. So it's going to be, I'm sure they are going to map this out, but you're still going to have to feel for it, which is one more thing for, we're going to have to watch with Rojas and Hefner here.
Let's transition from there into where I wanted to go next with you, John, because we've got the privilege of having you here. Haven't talked as much baseball with you or read as much baseball from you as I would like in this particular year. So we were going to get into, we asked you for 3 observations. I just felt like we had John Harper here. I wanted to hear your analysis a little bit of what's been going on the field. And I don't know if you had Rojas. Did you have Rojas as one of your 3?
I did. Yeah.
I figured you would. So let's start there. What have you thought? Because you bring up how he's going to have that feel for his pitching because out of necessity right now, Mets don't have much of a rotation, but they do have arms. So he's going to have to figure out how to use them. And Hefner, as a young pitching coach, is going to have to do the same. What have you seen so far and what we're going to talk about related to Rojas and his feel for games? And do you think he's going to be up for what lies ahead here that we're discussing with the pitching?
Yeah, I do. We've talked about it a little bit on Baseball Night in New York. And actually, the season opener, I wrote a column. That's where it's kind of started. Even in spring training, I got a pretty good feel. I know I've talked to you about this a little bit. The same thing. It's nice to talk to him. He does give you some substantive answers when you ask just baseball questions, things like that. But that's going back to the season opener. I was really astonished that he pulled Robbie Cano out of the game in the 8th inning and put Gimenez in for defense. I just didn't think he'd be willing to do that early. But he said, and I asked him about it, and he said, "Listen, we got to take the ego." Basically, said we got to take the egos out of it. He said he had communicated with Cano ahead of time, which was obviously very important in a situation like that, and let him know he was going to do it. But it just told me that he was going to do what he felt was right to win games and not be intimidated by older players as a rookie manager. It would have been interesting to see how it had gone with Cespedes. If Cespedes stayed around, that would have been difficult to keep pulling him out of games or using somebody else. But in any case, so I've liked the feel, and I've liked, when they were struggling and he was getting some tough questions, I'd like the fact that he wasn't shying away from them and just giving you those standard answers, kind of stonewalling, making an excuse for players. In particular, I remember that one of the nights Matz was hit hard. He talked about how he saw Matz's delivery slow down from the dugout, and also talked about Nimmo taking a bad route. Like, he's not crushing guys, but he's also giving you some kind of honest observation, which not all managers do. We know I thought one of the problems with Callaway was he was so worried about sticking to a script that he wouldn't even go there. And I think when you get into tough times and you're going to be you're going to show that type of candor, which also reflects the fact that you feel like you have a trusting relationship with players, trusting enough to do that. I think it bodes well for your relationship with the press because I think the media is going to give you the benefit of the doubt if they see the way you're handling those things. So all in all, I do like what I've seen from him. I think he's got a pretty good feel for the game. I think managing in the minors all those years, you're starting to see it. I think he feels really comfortable with a lot of things he's doing. I thought the media thing might be the hardest because that was obviously something he hadn't done. So, I like what I've seen from him for the most part.
Yeah, I think that, and we talked about this on opening day a little when we were texting back and forth about who was going to write what, and that the Cano thing right out of the chute was important because the knock on him going in was he's young, he's about the same age as Robinson Cano.
Yeah.
tight. I heard from inside that clubhouse last year, those two were tight. And there was a concern that, okay, is Robbie Cano really going to be the shadow manager here? So making that statement right out of the gate was important. And it shows that they actually have a real relationship, not just like, oh, I'm Robbie Cano's Bobo, but they have enough of a relationship where he could sell to Cano, I'm going to take you out for defense, or I'm not going to bat you third, or these kind of status things. I agree that they may have dodged a bullet a bit with Cespedes not being there because he was really hard on Terry Collins with some of that prestige, like status, ego stuff. But the handling of Cano seems big, and his specific answers on baseball stuff has been great too. I asked him a question about Rosario slumping the other day. He gave me this long answer.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Inside pitch and how he's chasing, but he's not missing when he's chasing. He's making weak contact. But he said it in a way where he must be so confident in his relationship with the players because it didn't come off like he was ripping the player. And that's so hard to do. It came off like he was calmly diagnosing what they're working on. And it's not like it's going to be like, hey, Rosario, did you hear what the manager said about you? Which happened with Terry Collins sometimes, frankly. I agree that Rojas has been impressive that way. So this segment is called the three-batter rule. So Rojas was your one. What's your two, John? What's the second thing you've noticed this year?
My two is my new favorite player, or your alter ego, apparently, Andres Gimenez or Gimenez.
That's right.
I'm never sure.
Gimenez at broadcasting.
Yeah. I love watching him play. Listen, I'm an old middle infielder. The kid is smooth as silk with the glove. But it's more than that. And obviously he's done more with the bat than I think was expected. You can see, I think he's going to be a good hitter. He's going to use all fields, but he also has a pretty good feel for the game. We've seen him drop down bunts and just be heady in terms of stealing bases. I don't think he's been caught yet, unless I missed one. I think he has a real feel for instinct of the game. And that's something you can't necessarily teach. We've seen Rosario struggle with that. And he's been in the big leagues for 3 or 4 years now. So I think he's going to be a really good player. And I think, looking ahead, I think the Mets have a big decision to make. I think he has to be the shortstop next year. He's much better defensively than Rosario. So what do you do with Rosario? And I wouldn't make the turn to change now because let Rosario play the year. I wouldn't mess with his head. He hasn't played much second base or third base, but next year I think they need to have a plan in mind for him. And maybe in the offseason, who knows, maybe they'll make some moves, maybe they trade somebody. But where's Rosario going to play? Third base, second base? What is he going to be, a utility guy? We still don't. It's still hard to get a real feel for what he is because he's kind of fallen. He seems like he's taken a step backwards so far this year after what we saw second half last year. Well, especially offensively, he's back to. I mean, I don't think he's walked yet, has he? This year,
nope, not one walk.
I mean, that's a problem. So yeah, that's my number two. Is Gimenez is bright future, and he's been kind of a surprise that he was this ready to produce this year. Mm-hmm. And I thought one more reason to think that this team has a chance to do something when you have this kind of depth already in the infield.
You just kind of buried a big statement in there, though. The guy, Rosario, like the top prospect for several years, the guy who has looked good for months at a time in the big leagues, he's not the shortstop of the future anymore. You've seen enough of Gimenez where you're ready to say that pretty definitively, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. He's great defensively. And if he's going to hit like enough, and I think he is, I mean, I think at their best, I think Rosario can do more. He's got more power. He's got the speed. He can be a really good player. We saw it in the second half last year. So that's why I wouldn't change him right now. But yeah, I think that has to be something they figure out. What do you do with Rosario? I mean, I think he could be an option at second base, depending if the DH is in place and Cano, that's an option for Cano. Third base, depending on what you do with JD Davis or McNeil or whatever. So, and you listen, we probably shouldn't even dismiss Guillorme the way he's been playing. Mm-hmm. So they're going to have some decisions to make in the offseason.
You see anything? So we've liked what we've seen from Gimenez's offense. It's obviously good enough when you combine it with his glove from what we've seen so far to be an everyday player. But do you see holes? Do you see anything that you think the league's going to exploit? Because I think the reason I've been reluctant to have the opinion that you're having is, what if and I hear you're saying don't do it this year, but let's say you make that move. Let's say pitchers do adjust to Gimenez. He's hitting 190. You've crushed Rosario's confidence because you benched him for the kid that just came up. And now all of a sudden you go from 2 shortstops to 0 shortstops because everyone's all messed up. That's what I'm worried about. So do you see, like, what would you be worried about offensively with Gimenez if you're looking ahead to what he might have to stay on top of?
Well, he still needs to get a little stronger. That's the rap on him in the minors was that, pitchers could kind of overwhelm, overpower him, kind of not, the old cliche, knock the bat out of his hands. But
Right.
I've been impressed with what I've seen. He's willing to take the ball the other way. He goes to left field, and he also has a little pop when he pulls the ball. So I think the bat to ball skills, from everything I've heard about him from other scouts and just watching him, and I know he did struggle last year in AA, but then he ended up. I know it's a short sample, but he led that Arizona Fall League in hitting. So I think there's enough there to believe that even on the low end, you're going to get enough production to make it worthwhile with his defense where, where he's hitting maybe, 240, 250 without a lot of power. But I think there's a lot more there than that. So I guess there's always that risk, but I think he's still growing into his body. He's a young guy. So I think there's a lot more there. And but I think there's also enough time here to let this play out over this season to get a better feel for it and get a better feel. I mean, it's really hard to just know what exactly Rosario is. Is he ever going to reach that ceiling that has been projected for him for so many years?
It is difficult to know what he's going to be, and it becomes more difficult with every year, which has its patches of great play and patches of above average play.
Yeah.
It's a terrible play where you say, well, is he ever going to put the whole thing together? And these windows where some of the great shortstop that we've seen in recent years, it's not like the window's been that long. Carlos Correa had a down year last year. You never know how long you have with these guys. And if Rosario hasn't developed into the guy that the Mets had hoped, like, is he going to? I agree. And if you're not going to walk, by the way, obviously, so your only way to have an on-base percentage of 300 is to hit 300.
That's a problem.
It's not a good sign.
Yeah, that's a problem.
All right, third batter in the 3-batter rule. What's your third observation on the Mets this year?
A third observation is kind of in the same theme. Looking ahead, is that as good as Brandon Nimmo is at getting on base, he's not a center fielder, and that's been a problem for this team. And I think that's another that Rojas made that adjustment. He made that observation where you have to play deeper in the outfield because, I mean, balls were falling in there that shouldn't be falling in, especially with Nimmo in center. So again, what are you going to do with Nimmo? Ideally, you like him in that lineup as a guy who can get on base, 400 on base percentage. But what is this outfield going to look like? I mean, center field's been a kind of problem for them for years now, as far as finding a true everyday center fielder. So what is it going to be? Conforto's another year after this year, another year away from free agency. J.D. Davis now, is he going to be the third baseman? Are you going to put McNeil in left field? Again, a lot of questions there, but as much as I like Nimmo, what I've seen in center field is just convinced me that once and for all, they need to do better there on a daily basis in terms of defense if they really want to be a championship team.
What do you make of Nimmo as an overall player? He has the great on-base skills. He seems to have a tendency to get a timely hit. He's a pleasant person to watch on TV and probably surely be around in the clubhouse. And I think that's helped his reputation a little bit. But is he a well-rounded enough player for you to be one of your 3 outfielders every day on a good team?
Ideally not. If you have a strong enough outfield, he's a nice guy to have as your 4th outfielder. But that on-base percentage does give you something to kind of you'd like on that on a daily basis. So I don't know. He's another guy. Last year his season was you weren't sure what to make of it because he had the problems early. He had the neck problem. He wasn't hitting early. Was it all related to the neck? Then he came back in September, had a strong September. So it looks like there's still room for improvement there. But he's not a kid anymore either. So I think he needs to probably do a little bit more power-wise, extra base-wise, production-wise if you want him to be an everyday presence. But I mean, if he was a true center fielder, you'd say, great, he's in there every day. But if he's going to hurt you in center field, and I'm not saying he's terrible out there, he makes the pretty routine plays, but you really want a guy that's going to make better plays than that. And he gets, I referenced it earlier. Rojas made the observation. He took a bad route it's not the only bad route he's taken this year where he's been beaten on balls over his head. So that's a problem when you're kind of living and dying, especially with some of this rotation now isn't what it was where you're just striking out 10 guys a night. So you need guys that can make plays. So yeah, I think ideally Nimmo probably is a fourth outfielder, but the Mets have to find a center fielder. And, maybe it's this kid they drafted, but that's probably still a couple years away. This kid they drafted at high school, I forget his name,
Yeah.
Pete Crow something?
Crow Williams.
Crow
Armstrong.
Crow Armstrong. Yeah, that's
Excuse
right.
me. Yes.
Yeah. He's supposed to be tremendous in the outfield, but he's still, 18, 19 years old?
John and I come up in the tabloid world where you're relevant to us the moment you get called up and not a moment sooner. We predate but even though, we may be from different generations, but we both predate the idea of the prospect fetishizing of the internet. So, Pete Crow, whatever. We're going to learn your name when you get here.
Your favorite subject, the prospects.
That's right. Time for this date in Mets history, August 24th, 2015. I was there in the ballpark in Philly. The Mets hit a franchise record, 8 home runs in a game against the Phillies. David Wright returned that night from injury, leading into his ability to appear in his only World Series, and he hit the first home run that night. My one memory of that game, I can't remember if you were there, John, but my one memory of that game,
pretty sure I was there. I think so.
You probably, right. At that time, those were the glory days still at the very tail end of it when the Daily News would send multiple writers to a big game. I remember I was sitting next to Jay Horwitz, and when Wright hit the home run, just turning to Jay, and he was a little overwhelmed, like almost a little misty, like, can you believe this guy? Can you believe this moment? And it was like another magical moment in a magical season. And the only thing that had been really missing from that year was David Wright. And there was a real hope in the organization that he could be able to participate in what they were trying to do. And then he comes back, he hits the home run right away in Philly, where he always felt so comfortable hitting, and ends up getting to hit a home run in the World Series. But that's my memory of that night, almost like a foreshadowing of a nice couple of months for the Mets. Do you have any specific recollections of that one?
Yeah, I mean, I do. It was a feel-good moment, and just for him to do it in that first at-bat, it reminded you how special he could be. And I remember thinking at the time that, well, two things, that maybe this could be the kind of the final piece to what was, they had a chance to have a championship team. Although, and it was a week or so later that I think he had a pretty big series in DC, and I was there for that. I think around Labor Day series, when I remember him throwing the big fist pump when he came across home plate one time. So he was into it. You felt good for him. So that was one part. The other part was that maybe this guy still had been a chance to pick up that Hall of Fame resume that had kind of fallen off for a few years. And if he had a strong finish to his career, he still had a chance to be a Hall of Famer. And as we know, the back wasn't going to allow it to happen. But I do remember that moment as just, hey, this guy, there is something special about this guy when he's healthy.
There is. And I think that, what people remember obviously now so much is the early promise and the injuries, but there was something special about him as a player. And he was capable of those kinds of moments. And he was capable of coming up big. And I think, well, of course, he never got even close to that Hall of Fame caliber because of the injuries. It was really nice that he was able to play in the World Series for the Mets. That was a nice capper on what ultimately would be pretty much the end. And I also remember, in a little bit of a darker sense, John, kind of having the feeling that year, because he was already really breaking down. He was playing pretty well, playing almost every day down the stretch there in 15, and thinking, I wonder if this is pretty much going to break him physically, what he's putting out now. And it sort of did turn out that way a little bit, but it's nice that we got to see him.
Yeah, I think I do remember I wrote a column in Washington. I think it was that year when he came back, about just already the type of preparation he had to put in to play every day. And so, you knew that it was not going to be easy for him. And it made you think that, maybe he should really appreciate this because who knows how long. And remember, I'm sure this was part of it, the back, the neck, and everything he was going through. I mean, he was having problems getting that ball over from third base to first base. He was kind of throwing that half side on, almost submarine throw. And that became a factor in that postseason. It was a factor even in that Royals game where with Hosmer taking off and scoring, because it wasn't just, Duda still should have thrown him out. But I think the reason Hosmer did it in the first place was because Wright was throwing it over there with so little velocity to first base. But Hosmer decided to take the chance.
That's a good point.
paid off
It
for him.
it did. Mets fans, I believe, will recall that did pay off for the Kansas City.
Dude only missed the catcher by about 20 feet.
It was an ill-timed.
It was kind of a panic throw for sure.
Yes, it was. Doug and I have been doing something called In the Absence of Access to close out the shows this year because obviously we're not able to do anything with players this year other than what we're doing right now, which is Zoom calls. They're very controlled. You don't get to wander around the clubhouse. You don't get to read guys' body language, pull them aside. So we've been kind of talking about the things that we would be doing if we were able to be reporting as usual. The one I'll say quickly before I ask for yours, John, is right now it's Steven Matz, because I think that the way that the whole thing with Matz played out, losing his spot in the rotation, really underscored what the fans are missing ultimately when the writers don't have access, because the Mets were able to keep us away from Steven Matz for 5 days as they were publicly not committing to him being in the rotation. And then we didn't get a reaction from him once he was kicked out of the rotation. So under normal circumstances, what you would do was stand in the clubhouse, look at him every day, see if he was sulking, see if he was mad, see what was going on. I remember when John Maine was on his way out, he used to pull you aside and be like, if I'm going down, I'm not going down without a fight. And this is blah, blah, blah. Like, he was a psychopath, but you got that daily kind of feel for how he was handling a tricky situation. And I have no feeling for how Steven Matz is dealing with it. No one has a feeling. Steve Gelbs, who's normally would be with the team every day, has no personal interaction with how Steven Matz is feeling about any of this or what it's done to the trajectory of his career or what he's working on or anything. So I think that's a real concrete example of someone I'd like to talk to be able to tell Mets fans something that's going on. So that's my.
Yeah, it's a good example because this is so weird, this whole thing. I mean, I'd love to be at the ballpark for these games, but really you're not getting much out of being at the ballpark anymore because everything is done by Zoom call anyway, the pregame, the postgame. So it's different. And you're right. I mean, over the years as a beat writer, you learn so much about what's going on just by watching body language, things like that in the locker room, pre and post and all that stuff. So, my prelude answer would be I would love to sit down with Jeff McNeil and just say, what is going on in your head? Because we knew he was he had that snappage in him, but you're hearing it more with the live mics and no fans in the stands, just how crazy he is after every out it makes. And also what his preference, I'd like to know what kind of hitter is he really trying to be? Is he want to be that 350 hitter or does he want to be that guy that he fell in love with the power last year? But that's only my setup to say, really the guy I'd like to talk to more is Rojas, who we've already talked about, because as you know, some of the best things about being at the ballpark is being able to grab the manager one-on-one after he's done his pregame thing. And maybe you're out on the field or wherever. And just, some might be on the record, some might be off the record, depending on what he's willing to do. And just ask him some questions about what's going on. What does he think about some things, and what does he see in players, things like that he might not want to share publicly, in a broad setting. But if he kind of trusts you and you have that kind of relationship, you can really put a lot in your notebook, so to speak, about what's going on and for you to use it later. I mean, as you know, nobody was better at that than Terry Collins. Just and not necessarily even for information. Sometimes that was just some of the most entertaining times ever, was talking to Terry one-on-one at the ballpark. But it did. I mean, you and I both know we're still using some of that stuff we learned from him over the years in those little conversations about when things come up over the years about somebody like a Cespedes, for example. He didn't mind telling a Cespedes story off the record now and then. That's for sure.
No, he didn't. He did not. I remember, so many things about Terry, like little things that you knew how bad a loss was for him. For example, I used to position myself toward the door. If you're in the press conference room at Citi Field, to our listeners, there's the podium, there's the seats that are in front of it, and then there's like a door where the manager walks out the door, goes toward the clubhouse, and he's done. I used to sit next to the door. So if I wanted to grab Terry about something after press conference, I was positioned to kind of line up with him on the way out the door.
Yeah.
And I would start being like a step or two back, because you knew that when he got off the podium, if you whipped off his belt and it was like, don't talk to Terry tonight. It was like after a big loss. But if he kept the belt on to walk normal, you were like, all right, tough loss, but he's approachable. And then you're right, you get something you learn. And for Rojas, I think I may have used him as an example in one of these conversations with Doug in this very segment, because you would learn about him as a baseball man.
Yeah.
We're still getting to know this guy, and it's all public right now. And what you ask about in a press conference or in a Zoom press conference is like kind of a political decision. It's like once you ask it, it could be a headline, it could be public, you could be asking to talk about one of his players. But if you can get a guy one-on-one and be like, look, I'm not trying to blow anybody up, but what is going on with Rosario?
Right.
That can get you a better.
Yeah, and you might have some information that you don't want everybody else to hear when you ask the question. That's part of it too. So yeah, Rojas to me is an interesting guy. I think he feels comfortable enough that maybe you could have those conversations at some point once you get to know him a little bit better. We'll see. But that was that was always entertainment with Terry. Nobody was better than that. Oh, the only problem was where you lined up there when he came out of the press conference was 3 or 4 other guys were fighting for that pole position too, because everybody knew if they could just grab Terry coming out of a press conference, you might get something that could give you your lead for your story, your column or story or whatever. So that was always kind of a battleground to see who could get Terry in that situation.
Well, I'd like to say, John, I have lost a lot of battles in my career, but I came out ahead of me grabbing Terry over the years. I did develop a little bit of the skill for knowing how to approach him and when to push his buttons. But you're right. There was a lot of demand because you knew that he might pop off. All right, John, it's always a privilege to talk baseball with you, and a pleasure. I wish I had the chance to read more of your columns during this difficult year, but every time one is published, I read it closely. To our listeners, Doug and Keith will be back on Thursday, unless I am asked to replace Doug, because this has been so spectacular. That remains to be seen. But right now on the schedule, it's Doug and Keith for Thursday. Remember to subscribe to Shea Anything at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. John, thank you for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Andy. I enjoyed it.